All right, dust is starting to settle from Saturday, isn't it? But the leadership battle inside the Liberal Party, well, it's starting to get fierce. At this stage, reports are that Sussan Ley is the front runner. Now, it's Ley as in key. People getting that wrong all the time. Sussan Ley, the front runner. However, privately, Liberal MPs are starting to point to her record and her share of responsibility as Dutton's deputy for the loss. Joining me now to discuss this and more, senior reporter Carolyn Marcus and journalist at the Daily Telegraph, James Willis. Well, James, Sussan and Angus, they're both in contention. Finger pointing, yes, at Angus, the shadow treasurer, but also a lot of people saying to me today that Sussan Ley also must take responsibility. She was, after all, the deputy leader. So where to from here?
Well, Peter, in my view, Sussan Ley went missing, and I'm sure she was campaigning, but in terms of the media cut-through and the impact that she has and the response that she gets from the public and from the media audience is not up to scratch. I don't think she has enough cut-through. I personally think if you were looking at the Liberals that were campaigning, Michaelia Cash and even Jane Hume, get a lot more cut through. They seem to do a lot more interviews. I'm sure Sussan would push back on that, but I just don't think I'm convinced that she is leadership material. I know she's a very good local MP. She was a minister in former coalition governments, but for mine, I'd be looking at a different direction. And look, I don't think I think Angus Taylor made a fair few mistakes, and one of the main criticisms, and this may not just be on him, but it could be on the overall campaign, was that a lot of the economic policies were rolled out far too late. But the wider issue, Peter, in my view, and not just at federal level, but at state level, where the Liberal Party is in opposition by a long way, is the infection and the impact of the moderate branch, and in my view, moderates cannot win a government over, and the more the party pushes to the left, the far away they are from ever forming a government in Australia again.
And that's certainly what's happened at state level with the state Liberal oppositions, and some of them, like Victoria, have been in opposition for almost 25 years, but for one term in Parliament. Let's go to Sussan Ley, though, Caroline, and all these demands, the calls that are coming that the party must choose two women, not just a female leader, but a female leader and a female deputy. Some are saying that if they don't, they are, quote, morons. This is not a debate about gender. That's a smokescreen in my view. This is a factional fight between the left and the right, really, isn't it?
Well, you can't put aside the fact that Sussan Ley is a moderate and Angus Taylor is a senior Conservative. I mean, so obviously there's going to be a fight between those two factions as to who those groups can get into the position of leader. I mean, people who are backing Sussan Ley say that Angus Taylor, well, he's tarnished by how close he was to Peter Dutton, that he couldn't prosecute the party's economic agenda well enough to help them win the election. And Sussan Ley's detractors say, well, she didn't put forward enough policy in her portfolio despite having the largest staff allocation out of anyone in the opposition, and that she was secretly and behind the scenes backgrounding against Peter Dutton and undermining him. So you've got these competing arguments for both. But what I really reject, like you, Peter, is this idea that in order for the Liberal Party to win back voters, they need to somehow get down, just put more women in leadership roles. I would love to see more women there, but not because they are women, but because they deserve the spot. I'm not saying that Sussan Ley doesn't deserve to be leader, but it shouldn't be because she's a woman. It should be because
Agreed.
What she's achieved. So I really hate that reductive, demeaning argument for female voters.
100% agree. Of course, Labor picked up a lot of the female vote, but they have a male leader and a male deputy leader. So just putting a woman in there is no guarantee of success if your policies aren't right and all the other things we've talked about. Let's go, though, to the factional rumblings inside Labor, if we can. Richard Marles, of course, he's the leader of the Victorian right faction. He is opposing a move to strip the Victorians of a spot in Cabinet. They say they are owed a spot with the departure of Bill Shorten. They think that the reduction in the rights numbers should come out of New South Wales. But, of course, that puts a whole lot of people, including even Chris Bowen, Tony Burke's there as well, puts them in the hot seat. What do you think here, James?
Well, I think the five, I mean, to be honest, of those five, the easiest solution here would be to allow Chris Bowen to step back and take this larger role as part of the global UN climate movement, which is apparently not a full-time job and doesn't necessarily mean that he has to step back, but it's certainly a lot of work. And based on the details that I've seen, with Australia determined to, take a stance here on the global stage and host these major events, there could be an argument for Chris Bowen to step back from his portfolio. I mean, I think of all the Labor ministers, he is the one that does the party the most damage. I think he's extremely unpopular with the media. I think he comes across as very smug. So if he wants to take this new role, the Prime Minister would be ideal to pat him on the back and move him on. But it would be hard, certainly, to see him, demoting Tony Burke or Ed Husick or Jason Clare or even Michelle Rowland. And they need Michelle in terms of they're desperate, apparently, to have that female in the cabinet. So, look, maybe it's a win-win here and Chris Bowen takes the global role, steps back, and we don't have to put up with him every day talking about net zero and wind farms and electric vehicles and everything else.
Yeah, I dislike the UN on occasion, but I don't know that I dislike them that much that I'd send Chris Bowen their way. But anyway, what about Tanya Plibersek? She looks like she will be punished. She was once a leadership rival, of course, Caroline, to the PM. The talk is that she's going to move out of the environment portfolio. She'll be shunted off to the NDIS. Of course, that's where they sent Bill Shorten to bury him politically. Is that the plan for Tanya?
Well, look, Albanese was asked about this. He dismissed that plan as nonsense, but who knows, his word isn't good for much, as we've found out lately. But look, I wouldn't be surprised at all if next week, when they make the cabinet announcements, apparently, that she is demoted to some lesser portfolio. I mean, the frosty relationship between Tanya Plibersek and Anthony Albanese has got to be the worst kept secret in Canberra. We all saw when she lent in for that hug from Anthony Albanese, and he gave her this very awkward handhold in return. It was really a very public rebuff there, and then she tried to cover up for him by saying we should all be doing these silly COVID elbow taps instead. Ridiculous. She was also conspicuously missing from key environment announcements made during the election. Albanese would be there, but despite it being something that was in her portfolio, she was missing. And I think those things are very telling indeed. But we won't have to wait long. There's going to be a caucus meeting on Friday and then an announcement about the portfolios as early as next week.
Just quickly before we go, I put up a picture a little bit before there from the seat of Wannon. This is the one that Dan Tehan retained in Western Victoria, James. It shows there that this is a dispatch label on a box of pamphlets for legalised cannabis for the party, paid for by Climate 200. And we know the interplay with donors there. We also know that the key donor for Climate 200 has bought himself a cannabis farm in Tasmania. This is all getting murky and murky with the money that's moving around. And particularly, I'd say, in relation to cannabis, the Cannabis Party too. They were a preference harvester in many of these tight teal races. That's a concern.
That's right, and if every vote counts, and if you can harvest preferences that way, and Climate 200, keep in mind in the last couple of weeks before the vote, via direct emails from founder Simon Holmes à Court, was saying things are getting desperate. We really, really need your help to keep our MPs in their seats. And we learnt from the last election, Peter, that a lot of the donations from Climate 200 went to a comedian. There was money transferred to the company that sold the bin stickers that was giving out for Scott Morrison. And so if they're assisting the legalised cannabis party, well, we need to figure out how much money is involved here. The problem is we won't know for 20 weeks after the election campaign. But certainly, as you say, the wider issue here is that it is without question that some of the largest donors to Climate 200 and their MPs are the people that are making a lot of money in the renewable energy game, which is now a blank cheque and will continue in this term of government.
All right, we will keep pursuing all of that. Thank you both.